Welcome to Monday Night Storytime. Our book tonight is called Julia Child. It's written by Kyle McClear with pictures by Julie Morstad. It's a great book, and I'm really excited to share it with you. When Julia was very little, she had a splendid meal of sole menuire, and that was that. Julia fell in love with French food. She loved to eat French food, and she especially loved to cook it. On weekends, she and her friend Simka would shop at the market and gather new ideas and recipes. Back home in the kitchen, things didn't always turn out quite the way they expected or hoped. Looks a little burnt and messy. But together they took cooking and baking classes and practiced and learned a few tricks. Like many good friends, Julia and Simka sometimes disagreed about little things, but they never disagreed about the larger things. I like this. It says, number 1, some friends are like sisters. Number 2, you can never use too much butter. Number 3, it is best to be a child forever. When they dreamt of the future, they always pictured themselves cooking happily together, the oldest children in the world. Life was filled with far too many grown-ups who did not know how to have a marvelous time. The girls had no wish to become big, busy people, wearied and worried, hectic and hurried. It's a lot of hectic and hurried people, isn't it? One day, Julia and Simka had an idea of how to fix things for themselves and the grown-ups they knew. They would make recipes for growing young. Each day for a week, they worked on their dishes. They cooked extra slowly to bring out the flavor of not hurrying. They used delicate spices so that worries would disappear and wonders would rise to the surface. Look at the wonders rising to the surface. And when they were ready, they set a beautiful table, making sure the flowers were fresh and all the cups were full. It says joie de vivre this way. That means joy of life. As the savory scent of cooking wafted through the streets, a curious crowd began to gather. Soon all sorts of big, busy people wanted a place at the table. And what a table it was! Fluffy crowds of cheese souffle, perfect loaves of crusty baguette, a golden compote of fresh peaches, sweet as summer sunlight. At first the room was very quiet as the grown-ups nibbled and sampled, and then the room began to fill with sound, a shriek of pleasure, a shout of delight. All those big, busy people who were weighed down with worries, who couldn't remember the last time they climbed a tree or even rode a bicycle, who never watched cartoons and only read biographies, well, they began to have a marvelous, rowdy, childlike time. Look at these two, they're having a blast. But then things started to go not so marvelously. As they ate, the grown-ups began to argue. It seemed they were very hungry, too hungry. They were hungry for the fun they had forgotten and the games they no longer played. They grabbed the food. They grabbed the food up all at once, fearful it would not last. Just look at them, said Julia. Where did we go wrong? I think the problem is not that the world is filled with too many grown-ups, said Simka. The problem, said Julia, is that too many grown-ups don't have the proper ingredients. So for their last recipe, the two friends fixed a few things. Adding a pinch of this and a dash of that, they made smaller portions, not too little, not too big, just enough to feed the sensible children from whom these senseless grown-ups grew. The room fell quiet. Petit gâteau, chocolate almond cupcakes with chocolate butter icing and the richest, creamiest centers. Each morsel was so delicious. There is plenty enough for us all, announced Julia, so the grown-ups would get over their feelings of never enoughness. And it worked. This time, when they ate the cakes, they were a little less beastly and a little more generous. Well, sort of. The truth is, grown-ups often need some extra help. Baffled and befuddled, mindless and muddled, they sometimes forget what they know. So Julia and Simca made a cookbook to remind them. Their cookbook is called Mastering the Art of Childhood by us. I love this last page because here we have some of the adults learning how to be children again. So I didn't do any special art this week because really I'm one of those adults, right? Sometimes I can get hectic and busy and worried and befuddled. And I need children like Julia and Simca to teach me to find some of the simpler, beautiful things in life. And so maybe some of you can be thinking about what is the recipe for childhood and what would be the thing that you would tell adults when we're not acting generous or kind with one another. How could we be different? I would love to hear from you, and maybe you can teach us some things that would make our world a better place, because I think our world could be a better place, and maybe you could help us. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for reading with me.